Today we're going to take a look at empowerment and empowering methodologies. So hopefully you've done the reading and looked at the other videos for this session. If not, go back and do so, and then this lecture will make a lot much more sense to you. As we dive into empowerment, it's important to note the opposite of empowerment, which is often dependency. It's a very real thing, as you saw in that lecture, in that video that you watched, and it's easy to unintentionally create dependency in the communities that we work in. And especially if you're not the first one working in an area or a community, or there's other folks working around you, it's very likely that there's already been some form of dependency created. And so there's a cycle that needs to be broken as you seek to empower people. You think people would naturally want to be empowered, but the reality is it's hard. It takes work. I have to put effort into it. So it's a lot easier just to receive. And so sometimes we have to convince people that really in the long run, empowering them will be the best way to go. And as we empower others around us, I think you'll find that you yourself are empowered as well. And so a little trick or something that helps me as I'm working alongside marginalized neighborhoods and communities is to remember that everybody is created in the image of God. And as was mentioned in the short video on empowerment that you watched, the quote was, "Everyone is created in the image of God, and because that is true, everyone has capacity, or everyone has something that they bring to the table to offer that'll help them achieve their own better tomorrow." So as we dive in, let's look at a definition of empowerment. The World Bank defines empowerment as the process of enhancing the capacity of individuals or groups to make choices and to transform those choices into desired actions and outcomes. Central to this process are actions which both build individual and collective assets and improve the efficiency and fairness of the organizational and institutional context which govern the use of these assets. Empowered people have freedom of choice and action. This in turn enables them to better influence the course of their lives and the decisions which affect them. So often, those that find themselves in poverty are acted upon and have little role that they can play in their own development and their own choices. And so part of empowering is giving people the ability and the power to make choices for themselves. We may not always agree with the choices that they make. However, it's key and important that they be able to make them themselves. And so often empowerment, we can look at it like parents trying to raise children. One of the things parents try to do with children is try to empower them as they grow older so that they become independent and are able to make their own choices. Now, this analogy breaks down in that we don't want to be condescending or paternalistic and think of the people we're working with as children, as they are in fact adults and capable. But that analogy helps us understand a little bit of what we're after. Or you can think of it this way. Think of a good or your favorite boss or supervisor that you've had at a job or in some sort of volunteer capacity. Why did you like them? Why did you respond to what they were doing or to their leadership? I know for me it's often when somebody is empowering me to reach my potential, when someone is trying to put me in places and in situations in which I can use the gifts and skills that God's given me to my fullest capabilities, as opposed to someone who's micromanaging every step along the way. Often when we micromanage, we create dependency. However, when we try to empower people, we enable them to live up to their potential. So let's take a look at a couple of empowering methodologies. Both of these were in your reading, and so we're just going to highlight a couple of the key points, and you can go back and look at your readings to get some more detailed information about them. The first one we're going to look at is Asset-Based Community Development, or ABCD. And the second one we're going to look at is Appreciative Inquiry, or AI. So ABCD, as you read about in your reading, was created by a couple of guys out of Chicago, Kretzmann and McKnight, and it was created at a time in which development organizations and institutions and the industry, if you will, was primarily looking for needs, primarily entering communities and asking, what do you need, or what problems do you have that need to be solved? And so they came alongside and asked, well, how can we do that in more of a positive light so as not to be communicating to people that they have a problem or that they are a problem, but rather that they have something to offer. And so they came up with ABCD, or Assets-Based Community Development. And so their principles are that local people are committed to their own development, that local people naturally will be committed to their future, committed to providing a better environment for their children, etc. and that development must start from within the community. It can't begin with resources that are brought from the outside and imposed upon the community, but rather must start from within the community using local assets that are already there. And so part of the job of a facilitator is to connect the assets that are already present, make a network of those assets so that then they can be put to the use for the betterment of everybody, not simply the few. And so that's the job of a facilitator, is to identify and mobilize these capabilities, skills, and resources that are already present. Cressman and McKnight have a survey that they wrote, which is extremely extensive and extremely long, and perhaps even a little bit of overkill. However, they talk about skills that we take for granted oftentimes, and oftentimes skills that are probably taken for granted by community members themselves. For example, say there's a grandmother who loves taking care of children and is very good and gifted at it and very nurturing. Well, perhaps she could offer to take care of a child or two in the neighborhood or in the community, thus enabling a single mom to find a job to better provide for her family, or a family that needs a dual income to provide the chance for the mom or the dad that's the primary caregiver of the children to go and find a job, and also providing work for the grandmother taking care of children in her home. So you want to look for resources and solutions from within, such as that child care example, not necessarily always looking for outside relationships or outside resources. In order to do that, though, you have to build local relationships, and they're very big on only bringing in outside resources when local resources are insufficient. So this begs the question, well, what is insufficient? Well, that's going to vary from context to context and situation to situation, and also what is outside. And that's going to vary as well from situation to situation and context to context. In a rural community or a rural village that doesn't have very many neighbors butting right up against it, local and outside is very easily defined. When you move into a city and an urban context, one neighborhood or one community bleeds over into the other one, those boundaries often become blurred. And so ABCD looks at several different forms of individuals and institutions, which kind of help us give us ideas of where we can start looking for resources. The first is with individuals, looking at an individual and whatever they have to offer to the community. The second type of person or type of institution to look at is an association. And associations are often, as defined by them, less formal, less dependent on staff. There could be things like churches or clubs, etc. in the local neighborhoods and communities. And then finally, institutions, which are more formal, government perhaps, local businesses, local nonprofits or hospitals, things of that nature where resources can be mobilized. Often in these places you find things like meeting rooms, or you find other resources that could be used to help people in their community and be mobilized. And many times they have resources available, and they're just looking for ways to mobilize them that they're not aware of. So that's a brief look at ABCD. Now we're going to dive in to appreciative inquiry. And this is a cycle. It's a circular approach to development, and one which repeats itself. So the first step at the top of the circle or the square here is discovery. So to ask, what's already life-giving within the community? What's giving life? What's the best of what's already happened? Well, let's appreciate that and see how we can expand on that, how we can see that grow. Now, sometimes we have to ask questions and prod to help people see that, because especially if people live in a neighborhood or a community that is marginalized and is often talked about having nothing good, we have to draw that out of them and help them see that. Not long ago, I was talking to a woman who had lived in a neighborhood for 30 plus years and had believed the news clippings about the neighborhood. And so then when I was asking her, why do you still live here? What puts a smile on your face when you walk around town? What do you enjoy about this neighborhood? Was she able to start to see some of what was already happening that was life-giving around her? So once you've discovered a little bit about that, you dream. Well, what could be done here? What could this neighborhood be? What is God calling this to be to? So we want to envision what could happen. And then once that dreaming is done, together with the community, then you begin the dialogue. Well, what should we do? Well, how do we go about that? What would the ideal be? And together we co-construct programs or projects or the better future that we're striving towards. And then you implement, or the delivery. And then as you do that, you ask, well, what's working? How can we increase what's working? How can we sustain what's going well? And then that brings you back to the discovery phase. As you're like, well, what's working is what's giving life. And you keep going round and round the cycle. And hopefully it's not a circle, but rather a spiral that then spirals you out and leads you to that better future or the better tomorrow that you're looking for. So looking at appreciative inquiry as contradicted or alongside compared to a problem-solving method or the traditional method of community development, let's compare those things. So the underlying assumption in a problem-solving approach is that organizing or community development is a problem to be solved as opposed to a mystery to be embraced. The focus is on searching for the problems or what's wrong, as opposed to looking for the possibilities. Planning metaphor is you want to solve problems, and so you create this tree and we solve this one and then this one and this one, as opposed to a possibility tree. Well, what could be present here? And so our method is to identify the problem as opposed to visualize the best or visualize what could be. And so in a problem-solving approach, you ask, well, what are the felt needs? Where are those present? As opposed to what already is here that is good or that is life-giving. You want to analyze the causes or look at a lot of cause and effect as opposed to envisioning what might be. People already know why their community is failing. So instead of dwelling on that, which those things will come out naturally, envision, well, what could be? If we adjust and tweak these things, what could happen? And sometimes that little tweak or that little positive spin that you put on it can motivate people and give them the encouragement to move forward into the future. And so instead of analyzing the possible solutions as the practitioner, you want to dialogue about what should be or where we can go as a community with the community. And you want to innovate. You want to involve all the people around you about what can be or where you can go instead of doing the action planning and then presenting that action plan as a facilitator. So as we step back and look at some of the similarities between ABCD and AI, what are some of the things that they have in common? Well, first, the practitioner is a learner and a facilitator and not always a doer. Both start with what's already taking place in the community, what's already there that is good, and both use local resources. And the reality is both take a lot of time. Oftentimes the problem-solving approach is a lot easier to go in. You see results a lot quicker. But then the question is, were all those results sustainable? And so in this next lecture here, we're going to look at evaluation. How do we evaluate what's going on so that the results can be sustainable and so that the better future can be ongoing and not just one brief moment in time.